The bus engine hummed low as the highway stretched endlessly ahead. Emily Carter leaned her head against the cold window, letting her thoughts run faster than the passing miles. 12 hours. That was the distance between her solitude in a tiny apartment and the fragile hope of reconnecting with her family. 12 hours of cramped luggage, uncomfortable seats, and cheap roadside coffee, all to be there for her brother Daniel's surprise birthday party. In her bag, she carried a gift with more emotional weight than any colorful wrapping could convey. Her father, Richard's wristwatch, a simple object, yet steeped in memory. With every jolt of the bus, Emily saw her father's face adjusting the hands of that watch out on the porch, as if time itself could be tamed. It was the perfect gift, a gesture that, she hoped, would bring her closer to Daniel. When she finally stepped off the bus into the old hometown terminal, night had already blanketed the streets in silence. The taxi rolled through familiar avenues, and her heart beat faster with anticipation. Around each corner, she imagined loud music, colorful lights, the scent of fresh-baked cake. She pictured hugs, smiles, and maybe finally a feeling of belonging. But as she climbed the front steps of the family home, something already felt wrong. The street was too quiet. The porch light flickered, dim and tired, and when Linda opened the door, her mother's face didn't light up with joy. It stiffened with embarrassment. Emily smiled, trying to hide the exhaustion of her trip. "Where is everyone?" The silence before the answer was worse than any word. Linda took a breath and replied, without meeting her daughter's eyes. "The party. It already happened." Inside, the proof was undeniable. Stacked plates, deflated balloons, confetti clinging to the carpet. The party had happened, just not with Emily. In that moment, 12 hours on a bus stopped being just a long ride. It became the symbol of something far heavier. Years of exclusion, calculated silences, doors quietly closed. What seemed like a careless oversight masked secrets that would change everything. Because that night, Emily didn't just find out the party was over. She realized she was about to unlock the most dangerous box in the Carter family, the truth. And that's when the unexpected happened. What if it were you? Would you have the courage to face your own family, reopen old wounds, and demand what's rightfully yours? Drop a comment with the city or country where you're following this story from. I want to see how far this message has reached, and who else has had to fight not to be erased from their own story. That cold autumn morning, Emily Carter closed the door of her small apartment, where she lived alone. The clock read 6, and the gray sky hung like a heavy blanket over the rain-soaked rooftops. With a backpack on her shoulders and a simple suitcase in hand, she took a deep breath before heading down the narrow stairs. 12 hours on the road separated her from her hometown and what she hoped would be a new beginning. The idea of a surprise party for her older brother, Daniel Carter, seemed like the perfect excuse to show that she still belonged to the family that had often left her out. The lobby smelled of fresh cleaning and citrus disinfectant. When she pushed open the glass door and the cold air bit her face, Emily felt her stomach twist. She had chosen to come, despite her friend Grace's warnings, driven by an old, aching need, the desire to belong. Wrapped carefully in her bag was a gift, not new but heavy with meaning. Inside a polished wooden box was Richard Carter's wristwatch, their father's. He used to sit on the porch, adjusting the hands in a quiet ritual that always calmed her. After he passed, the watch stayed with Emily. Now she planned to give it to Daniel as a symbol of peace and affection. At the bus station, the sound of suitcase wheels on stone echoed beneath metallic announcements bouncing off the high ceiling. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the food court. Emily boarded the bus and found her seat by the window. A baby cried 2 rows back. An elderly man flipped through a yellowed newspaper. A couple whispered over a phone screen. The engine purred, and once the bus hit the highway, the steady vibration of the road became a kind of metronome for her thoughts. She watched the scenery pass like a movie. Green signs pointed to towns dissolving in the rear view. Bare trees cast long shadows across the fields. At every stop, Emily grabbed a coffee and a plain sandwich. The bitter coffee warmed her hands and left a trace of comfort in her throat. It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon, but her heart beat with the rhythm of someone preparing for a silent reckoning. Anyone who's ever given everything to someone and got nothing in return will understand what comes next. She remembered past birthdays when her mother, Linda Carter, went all out for Daniel. Blue balloons, chocolate cake with strawberries, guests filling the backyard. During those same parties, Emily learned to stand in the corners, hold plates, fetch napkins, smile for photos where she always looked a little out of focus. It wasn't resentment, just a recognition of the space she occupied. She'd grown up in the shadow of the admiration poured onto her older brother. Daniel was the polished mirror. Emily was everything outside the frame. Still, the trip felt like possibility. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe her presence would matter. Her phone buzzed 3 times that afternoon. Text from Grace. The first said, "Are you sure?" The second, "Remember what happened at Christmas?" The third, "If it hurts, call me." Emily replied with a single heart and a message, "I got this." Meanwhile, back in her hometown, the Carter house still bore signs of a recent party. Balloons tied with silver ribbons, plastic cups stacked up, and the sweet smell of frosting lingering in the air. Linda was wiping down the table, distracted, while the warm kitchen light glowed softly off the tiles. Anyone passing by would have no idea what was about to unfold. By the time the bus pulled into the station, it was already night. A light drizzle dotted the car headlights with soft halos. Emily stepped off, felt the damp air on her skin, and called a cab. The back seat smelled of worn leather. As the car drove through streets she knew by heart, memories flickered like snapshots. The stationery store where she bought notebooks, the bakery that sold pink-glazed donuts, the park where she'd learned to ride a bike. Everything looked smaller and quieter, like the town had grown tired too. The taxi stopped in front of the 2-story house. The windows glowed faintly. The porch held pots of begonias and a worn-out welcome mat. Emily paid the fare, grabbed her suitcase, and climbed the steps. Her heart pounded like a war drum. She rang the bell. The sharp chime echoed through the hallway. Footsteps approached. The doorknob turned. Linda opened the door with a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Her face, shaped by years of worry and pride, took a second to find the right expression. Emily smiled, choosing tenderness over confrontation. She said, "Mom, I'm here." Linda blinked, as if needing to rearrange her thoughts. Her voice came out soft. "Emily, you came." Emily lifted the wooden box, holding on to what joy she still had. "Of course I came. It's a 12-hour trip, but I wanted to be here. Where is everyone?" Linda stepped back slightly. The hallway behind her smelled of cake and dish soap. On the sideboard, an extinguished birthday candle still gave off a sweet scent. The living room looked tidy, yet tired. Plates stacked in the kitchen, crumpled napkins in the trash. Streamers tangled around the couch leg. Confetti clung to the carpet fibers. The music had stopped. The silence felt like a character of its own. Linda tucked her hair behind her ear and delivered the sentence that unraveled the whole trip. The party was last night. Daniel wanted to move it up. Everyone had plans today. The word "last" cracked something in Emily's chest. The gift felt heavier. Her hands turned cold. She asked carefully, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Linda leaned against the wall as if the wallpaper might offer her an excuse. "I didn't think you were coming. You didn't confirm. And Daniel said it would be easier this way." Emily breathed in, feeling the air burn. She did the math. The hours, the missed calls, the invitations that always came too late. Questions and answers crashed into each other, bumping against old memories. Richard's face appeared in her mind, calm, sitting on the porch, tilting his watch toward the setting sun. She clutched the box tightly, as if her father might reach through the wood and guide her. She said, "I confirmed with you on Tuesday, and I asked for the time. You said you'd let me know." Linda tried to smile, but it didn't land. "I got mixed up. Everything was so rushed. You know how it is with Daniel. His friends were only free at night, and I figured you'd get caught up with work." Emily stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath her suitcase. Every detail told a story. On the coffee table, a chocolate-stained napkin looked like a map of islands. In the corner, a blue balloon sagged slowly. The yellow lights cast soft shadows on the wall. Emily's body trembled, but her voice was steady. She said, "I'm here." Linda replied, "I know." Emily pressed, "I came for you, and for Daniel." Linda looked down. When her eyes met Emily's again, there was a flicker of guilt mixed with impatience. She said, "Daniel went out with some friends. They'll probably be back late." Emily scanned the house like someone checking a stage after the show. Leftovers, traces, misplaced things. Everything pointed to a great party. Everything pointed to her absence going unnoticed. And in that moment, what hurt wasn't the party itself. It was what it confirmed about her place in this family. It wasn't a one-time slip. It was a pattern. But to understand what led to this, we need to go back a few months. Since Richard's death, the family had moved like people tiptoeing through a minefield. There were untouched topics, sealed boxes in the attic, a folder of documents no one dared open. Daniel, ever confident, had taken charge of the hard conversations. Linda, ever doting, met his every demand. Emily, realizing her voice only echoed into emptiness, had chosen strategic silence. Today, that silence came at a cost. Still, she tried to offer a gesture of peace. She opened the wooden box. Her father's watch, its leather strap soft and the glass scratched in 2 places, glinted under the living room light. Emily held it out to Linda. She said, "I brought this for Daniel. I thought he should have Dad's watch." Linda raised her hand, touching it gently, as if it were delicate. Her gaze shifted, maybe with a flicker of memory. She said, "Your father's watch was always beautiful." Emily nodded. "He used to set the time at dusk." Linda whispered, almost conspiratorially, yet with a distance that stung, "Daniel will like it." The phrase hit Emily like a cold wind. Daniel will like it. A preposition that left her outside the sentence. She took a breath, closed the box, the click echoing down the hallway. She said, "I'll wait for him." Linda offered, "If you want, I can give it to him." Emily shook her head. "I'd rather do it myself." They stood in silence for a few seconds. The fridge hummed. A car splashed down the wet street. The smell of frosting grew stronger, as if determined to remind them the party already had a favorite. In Emily's chest, something old began to rearrange. It wasn't just sadness. It was a promise that from now on, she'd start pulling at the threads everyone pretended weren't loose. And in that moment, no one could say she was wrong to feel the way she did. What she didn't know was that this day held the biggest twist of her life. Because next to her father's watch, there was another legacy no one seemed ready to acknowledge. The house held clues, the family held keys, and Emily, with her suitcase damp from the drizzle and her hands steady on the box, was ready to start unlocking them. And that's when the unexpected happened. But to truly understand what happened that night, we need to go back a few years. Back when the Carter home still smelled of fresh varnish, and Richard's watch set the family's pace like a patient conductor. On some afternoons, the sun would hit the porch just right, lifting golden dust into the air. Richard would sit in his wooden armchair, tool case open, adjusting the second hand with a calm that felt infinite. Emily would perch on the steps, knees scraped from playing in the yard, watching her father's precise movements. He would say, without lifting his eyes from the watch, "Time is a choice. Whoever changes your time is someone you allow close." Emily would respond with the seriousness of a child guarding a secret, "I choose to stay close to you." Richard would smile, close the case, press 2 fingers to her wrist and add, "Then keep the right kind of silence and speak only what matters." Back then, Daniel already had medals and proud photos piling up. His room looked like a showcase of accomplishments, soccer trophies, framed certificates, and a flag of his favorite team hung above the bed. Linda dusted those symbols with the care some reserve for sacred objects. The kitchen was the place of celebrations, always ending with the same chorus, Linda declaring that Daniel was born to shine, and that one day, the whole town would know his name. Emily learned to appreciate quieter beauties. She sketched in her notebook, collected fallen leaves, and carefully cataloged the trees in the park by name. One of Emily's birthdays stood out like a photograph that never fades. There was a vanilla cake with light blue frosting and tiny sugar pearls. When she blew out the candles and made a wish, Daniel walked into the kitchen with bigger news. He'd been invited to join the state school's soccer team, which meant more exposure and travel. The birthday cheers turned into a celebration for him. Linda turned up the radio to boost the party vibe and, without realizing it, switched the birthday tune for the team's anthem. Emily smiled, clapped, cut her own cake, and handed out the slices. It all felt natural, as if the house had a magnet that always pointed toward Daniel. Years later, at Emily's high school graduation, the scene repeated in a new shade. The auditorium smelled of fresh paper and cheap perfume. Emily received her diploma, felt the coarse fabric of the gown, and searched the crowd for her mother. Linda was in the side aisle, on the phone, waving at someone else. Daniel had just been accepted into a local internship program, and a town newspaper wanted to interview him. Richard, standing beside Emily, gave her a small, sad smile, placed his hand on her shoulder, and said softly, "You see the world in a way most people don't. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." When Richard fell ill, the living room took on a sound no one forgets. The beeping of the hospital monitor, painfully precise, like time being drawn with a ruler. Emily and Daniel took turns visiting. Linda stayed as much as possible, driven by a restless hope. Richard tried to keep his humor. One late afternoon, he called Emily in for a longer talk. The hospital room window framed a pale sky, the cold light making the equipment glint like water. Richard said, his voice deeper than usual, "The watch stays with you for now. Later, when you think it's right, you can give it to Daniel. But listen, look into what I planned, not what they tell you." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Richard looked at her like he was passing down a crucial instruction. "There's a folder with my name on it in the attic. Inside, there's a card from a law office and a letter. If anyone ever says there's nothing there, go up and check. And remember what I told you. Time is a choice." He said no more. The beeping continued. The next day, things worsened. Emily entered the room to find the pillow still shaped like her father's head, but the bed was empty. That feeling of too much space stuck to her like a scent that doesn't fade. The funeral was simple, white flowers and a timid choir. Daniel received hugs and promises of support. Linda held her chin high. Emily stood near the casket and felt the cold wood beneath her hand. She committed the sound of the lid closing to memory. Days later, while Linda welcomed neighbors carrying lasagna trays and savory pies, Emily climbed to the attic. The folding stairs were narrow. The air upstairs was dry, with dust that stirred at the slightest step. Beams of light streamed through wooden slats, striping the floor. There were boxes labeled in black marker: winter clothes, Christmas decorations, school books. In the back, a metal chest with a small lock. Emily searched a jar filled with screws and ribbons, found a likely key, and opened it. Inside, a brown paper folder with Richard's handwriting, R. Carter. She held her breath. The folder contained a business card, Evelyn Brooks, attorney at law. There was also a letter, folded in thirds. Emily unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of ink. The first lines were straightforward. Richard wrote about the importance of treating both children equally and laid out a plan to preserve the family home, the small workshop out back, and a sum he had saved in a shared fund. The letter mentioned a will and specific instructions. It said any important decision should be communicated to both children, with written confirmation. In the final sentence, Richard asked both Emily and Daniel to be patient with each other. Emily read it again, as if trying to etch the words into her memory. She returned the folder, closed the chest, and came back down. That night, she told her mother what she'd found. Linda was stirring a pot of soup, the steam carrying the scent of time. Emily said, "I found a folder with a lawyer's card. Ms. Brooks. Dad left a letter for us." Linda didn't look up. "Your father handled everything. There's no need to dig into that now." Emily pushed back. "He asked that we speak to the lawyer, together. I wanted to take you and Daniel." Linda turned off the burner and set the spoon down. "Daniel's already handling that. He's the oldest. He understands this better." The conversation ended with dishes clinking and an uncomfortable silence that filled the house. Still, Emily didn't let go of what she'd read. She kept the letter with her for days, protecting it like a lit match in the wind. Later, she returned it to the chest, her chest heavy with the sense that something important had been dismissed. Months passed. The first Christmas without Richard felt like a string of improvised gestures. Grace invited Emily to dinner, but she chose to stay with her family. The house had colored lights on the porch, the smell of roast turkey mixed with pine from the door wreath. Daniel arrived with friends, laughing loudly. Emily made a fruit and cream dessert. At the table, she tried to start conversations, but everything drifted back to Daniel's latest achievements. When someone asked about New Year's plans, Linda answered for everyone. Daniel might get promoted. Emily took a sip of cider, its sweetness sticking in her throat, and smiled on reflex. The next morning, the doorbell rang early. A courier delivered a brown envelope addressed to Linda. It was from Evelyn Brooks's office. Emily watched her mother open it, pull out 2 sheets, and frown. The papers referred to a meeting for asset review and execution of Richard's will, with both heirs required to attend. Linda placed the sheets in a cabinet drawer and said she'd handle it with Daniel. Emily felt her internal alarm go off. She said, "I should be at that meeting. The document says so." Linda gave a tight smile. "Let Daniel and me handle it. You have your own things." Emily burned with indignation, but her voice came out small. "I'm his daughter." Linda didn't budge. "And I'm his widow. I'll coordinate." The meeting happened without Emily. She only found out because later that day, she saw Linda with a coat over her arm and a black folder. Daniel walked in smelling of cologne, dangling a new keychain like a prize. Emily calmly asked what had been decided. Daniel replied offhandedly, "Just formalities. Mom gets the house. We'll sort out the workshop later." Emily asked, "And the shared fund Dad mentioned?" He talked about splitting responsibilities. Daniel tilted his head, pretending not to hear. "The lawyer said it's not exactly like that." Emily felt a hollow pit in her stomach. That night, she called the number on the card. Evelyn Brooks's secretary answered with a professional tone. Emily explained who she was. The secretary said Ms. Brooks could only speak by appointment and with all interested parties present. Emily scheduled a meeting, but on the day, she received a message. It had been canceled at Linda's request. The reason? "We're handling this within the family." Emily recognized the sound of a door closing from the inside. At the start of spring, Emily went back to the attic. The folder was where she left it. She flipped through it carefully and found a smaller envelope with something new. A long metal key with a number engraved, 231. There was also a short note, signed by Richard, Riverside Bank. "Safe deposit box, 231, only with both." The message was clear. Emily came downstairs with the key in hand, her heart pounding. She found Linda in the living room watching a cooking show at full volume. Emily showed her the key, read the note aloud, and asked to go to the bank with Daniel. Linda pursed her lips, examined the key, and said they'd handle it next week. Emily marked the date. The day before, Daniel texted saying the bank manager had rescheduled. When she tried to rebook on her own, the manager explained that access required all parties, with IDs and the appointed official. The tone was neutral, but the impact was sharp. The vault was real, but access in practice never included Emily. At the same time, smaller choices deepened her exclusion. Decisions about selling tools from the workshop were made by Linda and Daniel. Items were donated without asking. The garage was reorganized without her knowing. One rainy afternoon, Emily noticed that her father's watch, stored since the funeral, was 5 minutes fast. She sat on the edge of the bed, opened the box, held the watch in her palm, and wondered what Richard would say. Time is a choice. Who changes your time is who you let close. It hurt. It felt like someone had been adjusting the hands of her life without permission. Grace, from afar, followed the story through Emily's frustrated updates. In one call, her voice rang clear. "You're right to want to say, this is about respect and what your father left behind. If they won't let you in, you're going to have to build your own door." Emily looked at her father's watch and replied, "I'll open that door." That's when the invitation to Daniel's surprise party landed in the family group chat. Linda had shared it. Brief, no details. A picture with balloons and confetti. The date and place were listed, but the time was TBD. Emily messaged her mom privately, asked for the details, said she wanted to arrive early and help. Linda replied near the end of the day, "I'll let you know later." The promise hung in the air like laundry about to get caught in the rain. That 12-hour trip would take on new meaning in light of everything. Emily wasn't just showing up for cake. She was claiming her place as heir to memory, decisions, and love. She came in person, hoping to reopen the thread of safe deposit box 231, the will, the letter from Richard requesting written confirmation. Her presence was an argument against convenient forgetfulness. Anyone who's ever fought to be acknowledged in their own family will understand that kind of insistence. It's an act of defiance, a way of saying I'm here that can't be ignored. There's still one flash of memory that would fall on Emily that night like a leaf landing square on her face. A few months before he passed, Richard had taken her to the workshop out back. The place smelled of oil and wood. Jars of screws and washers lined the workbench. Shelves with labeled cans. Stiff brushes crusted with paint. Richard pointed to a thick piece of lumber saved from when he built the porch. He said, "Some things you only cut after measuring twice, and some you only open when the right people are around." Emily took the watch from his hand and asked, "Do you trust me?" Richard didn't hesitate. "I trust your clarity. One day, it'll save you." When Emily arrived that night and saw confetti stuck to the carpet, it all came flooding back. The folder, the lawyer's card, the envelope with key 231, the phrase "only with both." The pattern of being left out didn't feel like an oversight. It felt like design. And in that moment, the pain over the missed party turned into fuel for something sharper. If there was a vault, she'd find out what was inside. If there was a will, she'd demand it be honored. If the story had been told in halves, she would chase down the missing pages. As minutes passed in that silent room, Emily spotted a detail that made her straighten her back. On the sideboard, beside the extinguished candle, was a white card with black letters, Riverside Community Bank. The edge had a faint smudge of frosting. Next to it, a clip held a small slip of paper with numbers and a scribbled name, Marvin, manager. That card wasn't there by accident. It was a breadcrumb. Emily looked at her mother, folding napkins, and asked with the ease of someone who already knows the answer, "You went to the bank this week, didn't you?" Linda raised her eyes slowly. "Daniel and I stopped by to take care of something small." Emily moved her fingers close to the card without touching it. The air in the room grew heavier. Her father's watch weighed down her coat pocket. And then, like an echo finally finding space to resonate, Richard's voice came through clear. "Look into what I planned, not what they tell you." From that moment on, the missed party was no longer the problem. The real problem had numbers etched in metal and letters printed on legal stationery. It had been tucked in an attic, transferred to an envelope, delayed in meetings she was kept from. Now it sat there scattering crumbs across the sideboard, begging to be followed. It was supposed to be just another quiet night after a long journey, but the bank card on the sideboard turned everything into a taut wire. Emily took deep breaths, trying to contain the anger rising like hidden flames beneath ash. The silence in the house clashed with the storm inside her. What had seemed like just another slight, being excluded from her brother's party, now connected to something much bigger. Richard's will, safe deposit box 231, and the secret meetings between Linda and Daniel. Emily adjusted her coat, gripped her father's watchbox tightly, and said in a tone that made her mother finally look up, "Mom, I need to see what's in that box." Linda's face tightened, as if she'd just heard something offensive. The dish towel in her hands twisted between her fingers. "Emily, I already told you, that's not your concern. The bank requires paperwork, clearances. Daniel's handling it." Emily stepped closer to the table, her voice sharper. "Dad wrote that everything should be dealt with between the two of us. I have every right to be there." Tension thickened in the air. The kitchen still smelled faintly of burnt sugar from last night's cake, and the fridge's hum suddenly felt deafening. Linda turned her back, pretending to fuss with the dishes. "You're tired from the trip. You should rest." Emily placed the watchbox on the table. The solid thud made her mother pause. "I didn't come here to rest. I came because I want to be respected." The weight of those words hung heavy. It was like Emily had finally said out loud what she'd been holding in since childhood. Linda didn't answer. She walked into the living room and turned on the TV. A canned sitcom laugh filled the silence. Emily took a deep breath and packed the watchbox back into her suitcase. That night, she couldn't sleep. The guest room smelled like lavender from the spray Linda always used on the sheets. But beneath the scent was something bitter, the sense of always being on the outside. Emily tossed and turned, replaying every word from her father's letter, his calls for patience and fairness. When she closed her eyes, she saw his face lit by the cold hospital light, repeating, "Look into what I planned." In the middle of the night, she texted Grace, "You were right, the party was yesterday, but I found clues about the vault. I think they're hiding something." Grace replied almost instantly, like she'd been waiting. "Don't give up. They know how strong you are. They just won't admit it." Emily set the phone aside and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally came, light and tangled with uneasy dreams. The next morning, the house was buzzing. Daniel showed up with an almost offensive kind of energy, laughing loudly on the phone as he bounded down the stairs. He wore a new jacket, smelled of expensive cologne, and seemed completely unaware that Emily had barely slept. When he saw her in the kitchen, he raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "You actually came." Emily folded her arms. "I told you I was coming. Mom knew." He shrugged, opened the fridge, and grabbed a bottle of juice. "Well, you know how it is. We changed the date last minute. Everyone preferred Saturday." Emily's stomach turned. "Everyone except me." Daniel raised his glass as if to toast his own luck. "Don't take it personally. It was just a party." Emily planted her hands on the table, staring him down. "It's never just a party. You all make decisions and I'm left to find out after the fact. But not this time. I want to know what's in Dad's vault." Daniel's smile froze. He blinked a few times before responding, more quietly. "Who told you about that?" Emily didn't flinch. "Dad did. Before he died. I found the key." Daniel slammed his glass down in the sink. "You don't get it. Some things aren't yours to mess with." Emily stepped forward. "I'm his daughter, just like you." The air in the kitchen felt thinner. Oxygen. Gone. Linda walked in holding a laundry basket. She stopped short at the sight of them, trying to de-escalate. Enough, you two. This won't get us anywhere. Emily kept her eyes locked on Daniel. It will. It'll get me to the truth. Daniel grabbed his jacket and slammed the door behind him. The sound echoed down the hall like thunder. During breakfast, Linda tried to change the subject, chatting about neighbors and the weather. Emily didn't play along. The newspaper on the table had a headline about the economy, but for some reason, the word inheritance in the business section caught her eye. It felt like the entire world was pointing toward the truth. Later, while helping clear the dishes, Emily glanced at the sideboard. The bank card was gone. The space was spotless, as if it had never been there. Her pulse spiked. She ran upstairs, threw open her suitcase. The watch box was still there, but the vault key she'd kept with it was missing. She raced back downstairs, breath short. "Mom, where's the key to the vault?" Linda froze in the middle of the living room, her face pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Emily clenched her fists. "It was with me. Now it's gone." Linda looked away, adjusting the throw on the sofa. "Maybe you lost it." Emily almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Lost it? In my suitcase?" "No, Mom. Someone took it." Her mother's silence was the most painful confirmation of all. That afternoon, Emily walked through town, trying to clear her head. Cold wind brushed her cheeks, carrying the smell of damp leaves. She passed the park where she used to play, saw children running, heard the rusty squeak of swings. A memory struck. She was 7, crying with a scraped knee after falling from the slide. Linda had run first to check on Daniel. Only after that did she come back for Emily. The pattern had always been there. She stopped in front of Riverside Community Bank. The glass doors reflected her tired face. She tried to enter, but the guard stopped her, asking for an appointment. She explained that she was Richard Carter's daughter and needed information about the vault. The guard checked a list and responded politely. Box 231 was accessed earlier this week. The ground slipped beneath her feet. "By whom?" He replied, "Mrs. Linda Carter and Mr. Daniel Carter." Emily's heart cracked, equal parts fury and despair. The vault had already been opened without her. Whatever was inside might be gone, hidden, manipulated. She walked out of the bank with hard steps, the wind pulling her hair back. This wasn't about being left out anymore. This was betrayal, and in that moment, she decided she would stay silent no longer. What came next would change everything for good. Emily's exit from the bank felt like someone had cut the power in broad daylight. Cold air slapped her face like ice water. The automatic doors closed behind her with a mechanical sigh, and for a second, her reflection in the glass showed someone exhausted and fierce all at once. The blue Riverside Community Bank sign flickered twice, stubborn against the drizzle. The smell of wet earth rose from the pavement. In her chest, the certainty. Something had been revealed, but the final blow hadn't landed yet. Safe deposit box 231 had been opened. Not by her, not with her. Emily leaned against the brick wall and called Grace. Static hissed, then cleared. Her friend's voice came through strong, like pulling up a chair in the middle of a storm. "I'm here. Breathe. Tell me everything," Emily told her. The vault access. The names logged at reception. That old feeling of being left out, now stamped with time and proof. By the time she finished, her breathing had returned to something human. Grace asked, "Do you want to go home now, or turn this into evidence?" Emily glanced at her father's watch on her wrist. The scratched glass caught the pale afternoon light. "Evidence. I need proof." Grace offered a lifeline with calm precision. "Ask the manager for an access log. Names, date, time. That's not a secret. It's protocol. Then go see your dad's lawyer, Dr. Brooks. You mentioned her." Emily straightened, like spotting a path through tall grass. The name Evelyn Brooks echoed in her mind like a key sliding into place. She stepped back into the bank. The AC sliced through her sleeves. The guard recognized her tense expression and stood taller. Marvin, the branch manager, was summoned. He appeared from a glass office with a rehearsed smile and a cedar citrus cologne. Marvin spoke politely. "How can I assist you, Ms. Carter?" Emily didn't flinch. "I need a formal record of who accessed box 231 this week. Full names, date, and time." Marvin adjusted his glasses, checked his tablet, and nodded. "I can issue an access log. It's your right as a listed beneficiary. I'll need you to sign a request form." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she took the pen. The form had faint guidelines and felt heavier than it should. Marvin typed, printed, stapled. The sound of the staple was music. Emily read, "Linda Carter, Daniel Carter, Wednesday, 3:42 p.m. Duration, 17 minutes. Sign in and sign out. No mention of her. She thanked him in a whisper and slid the document into a notebook in her bag. It was the start of a shift. Outside, clouds scattered, but the air still smelled like rain. Emily walked to a corner cafe with copper lights and stacked cups that glinted under warm bulbs. The barista smiled, took her order. She chose a strong Americano and a walnut cookie. The sugar cracked between her teeth. At her table, she opened her father's watchbox. The brown velvet lining had a faded crease. The watch, weighty, familiar, seemed to meet her gaze. A thought struck like silent lightning. Richard always left clues. Measure twice, cut once, only with both. Look into what I planned. She turned the watch over and noticed something on the box's base, a faint ring where a cushion once rested. She traced the edge with her finger, felt a subtle shift in the wood. Her nail caught on a corner, a barely audible click. The base popped up 2 millimeters. Inside, a slim envelope, postcard-sized, tied with pale ribbon. Her father's handwriting tilted, confident, for when you feel left out. Emily's heart pounded loud enough for her to glance around. She peeled the tape gently and opened the envelope. The one-page letter smelled of old paper and dry ink. The first lines wrapped her like an embrace, pointing the way. She read in silence. If you're reading this, it means life pulled the blanket to one side and left you in the cold. I'm sorry for that. I know you. I know you'll seek what's right. I left with Dr. Evelyn Brooks an addendum to the will. It's only to be opened if there's evidence of an heir being excluded from access to assets or documents. If someone opened the vault without you, the addendum applies. Use the validation phrase, time is a choice, and don't accept vague explanations. Emily covered her face with one hand. Her coffee had gone lukewarm. This wasn't just a note, it was a password, a lever. At the end, a postscript in glowing ink. On the back of the envelope, there's a number. Memorize it, don't share it. 7104. She folded the letter and tucked it into her wallet lining. The number settled like a stone between her ribs. She called Grace. Her voice wavered with relief and righteous fury. He left an addendum. It's with Dr. Brooks, and I have the validation phrase. Grace, thrilled but steady, replied, Then today we flip the board. By dusk, Emily reached the red brick building housing Evelyn Brooks' office. The hallway creaked under old wood floors and smelled faintly of polish. A narrow window let in gray light. The receptionist, in a lilac blouse with sharp eyes, looked up. Good afternoon. Do you have an appointment? Emily replied. I'm Emily Carter. I need to speak with Dr. Brooks urgently. It's about a codicil to my father's will. I have the validation phrase. The receptionist hesitated, a pause that spoke volumes, then stood. One moment. Minutes later, the inner door opened. Evelyn Brooks emerged in a dark navy suit and modest necklace. Her gray hair was pinned back. Her eyes were the kind that had seen families fracture and rebuild in rooms like this. Emily, please come in. Her office was lined with thick-spined books, a heavy wooden desk, and a tall ceramic pot with a green plant. Warm lamplight softened the walls. Emily sat, gripping the chair's edge. Evelyn laced her fingers and waited. Time is a choice, Emily said. Evelyn nodded slowly, as if fitting the final piece of a puzzle. Very well. Your father instructed me to open certain attachments to his will only when that phrase was spoken by you, in person, with formal indication of exclusion. Did you bring something? Emily slid the vault access log from her bag. The paper caught the light briefly as she placed it on the desk. Evelyn read carefully, her fingers tracing names and times. When she finished, she opened a bottom drawer and retrieved a folder labeled Richard Carter. Inside, a thick envelope sealed with red wax. The stamp showed crossed watch hands. Breaking the seal sounded like a shell cracking. Evelyn read silently, the wall clock ticking behind her. At last, she placed the paper on the desk and exhaled. Your father was precise. This codicil states that the shared fund and any assets linked to Box 231 can only be accessed with written consent from both heirs. It goes further. There's a penalty clause. If one heir circumvents this, their share is redirected to an educational trust in your name, for use only in education and projects. The house remains under your mother's lifetime usufruct, but decisions about the workshop and backlot now require your direct approval. Emily absorbed the words like hearing her name after years of silence. A warm relief spread through her chest, tinged with an old pain begging for validation. This is solid? She asked. Legally airtight, Evelyn replied. Your father filed this with witnesses and a notarized signature. He included specific instructions. If you present evidence of unilateral access, I must notify the others and call a meeting to enforce the terms. Emily held the access record like a lantern. Then call it. Evelyn made 3 calls, marked the calendar, and scribbled on a notepad. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Be here a few minutes early. Your mother and brother were just notified by email and message. Emily stood but paused. Is it possible something was removed from the vault? Evelyn pulled a sealed inventory copy from a drawer. Your father stored a flash drive in the box. Full breakdown of the fund and usage instructions. If it was removed, we still have registered copies in my files and at the notary's. The vault was redundancy, not exclusivity. Your father measured twice. The phrase hit Emily like a warm beam from the past. She thanked her and left, clutching the folder. The hallway felt brighter. The scent of wax held a hint of victory. Outside, she called Grace. Tomorrow, 10, penalty clause. If they tried to cut me out, the trust becomes mine. Grace nearly laughed, but it was relief, not mockery. You've become the storm. I'm with you. Want me there? Emily looked at the sky splitting open above the rooftops. Yes. Night fell like a heavy curtain. At home, Linda set the table with white dishes and cloth napkins. Daniel balanced his phone against a glass, watching some easy laugh video. The sound of Emily's key in the lock cut through it all. She entered and smelled tomato sauce. The kitchen looked staged, the tile shining under tiny lights. Linda's voice was sweet but strained. Join us for dinner? Emily dropped her bag and raised her eyes, choosing honesty. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Dr. Brooks' office. All of us. Daniel glanced up from the video, forcing a smile. What's all this about? Emily replied evenly. To carry out what Dad planned. Linda pulled out a chair slowly, folding her hands. Emily, you have to understand. We were trying to simplify things. The bank's a hassle. Daniel was in a rush with work. Emily touched the edge of the table. Cold, smooth wood. Simplify for whom? You signed access without me. I have the record. The silence fell heavy. Daniel unfolded his arms, annoyed. You're making it dramatic. It was a formality. Nothing major. Emily lifted her chin. Her voice didn't waver. It was the condition, and the consequences are written down. Dr. Brooks will read them tomorrow. Linda tried to smile, but it collapsed at the corners. What did your father write now? Emily answered, that if one heir acts alone, their share in the common fund transfers to a trust under my name. The house stays with you, Mom, for life, but the workshop and lot now require my approval. Daniel slammed his cutlery on the table. A metallic clang echoed. This is insane. Dad would never do that to me. Emily inhaled. She saw her father on the porch, his wooden chair, the ticking hands. Dad did this for us, for both of us, to take care of each other, not to trample one another. Light flickered over dust in the air, tiny sparks in a slow burning fire. Linda squinted like trying to see an exit that no longer existed. Daniel stood without finishing his plate. The sauce smell gave way to tension. Emily cleared her dish but didn't eat. Her stomach held something else. Resolve. In her room, she opened the watch box and pressed the letter to her chest. A memory surged. The workshop, labeled jars, sunlight through cracks. Richard's voice. I trust your clarity. One day, it'll save you. She smiled, small, private, a light just for her. Then she packed her bag with documents, notes, the bank record, added a black pen and notepad, chose a simple blouse, a dark coat. The next scene was clear. Letter in her inner pocket, watch ticking perfectly, backpack leaning like a silent guard. Just past 11, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Be careful what you wish for. Emily's skin prickled. She stared at the screen, faced the threat, and breathed until fear backed off. Then, another message. This one from Marvin. The bank's digital confirmation, seal included. One more brick in a wall that would withstand the storm. At dawn, the house was tinged blue. The sound of the shower, the smell of coffee, the table set with mechanical care. Linda wore a beige coat. Daniel, a shirt with the top buttons undone. Emily tied her hair, grabbed her bag and the watch box. Before leaving, she touched the sideboard where the bank card had once sat. Now, only a paler patch of varnish remained. She touched the void, and somehow, it felt less empty. In the elevator, no one spoke. The mirror reflected 3 faces carrying different versions of the same story. On the sidewalk, the scent of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. Daniel walked a few steps ahead, trying to lead a path he no longer controlled. Linda followed, clutching her purse. Emily came last, but her stride had the confidence of someone who finally claimed her space in the hallway. At the office, Grace stood by the narrow window, blazer and sneakers, unlikely but perfect. When she saw Emily, her smile lit the room. "You ready?" Emily nodded. The receptionist led them into Evelyn's office. Chairs were lined up. The desk held a notepad and 4 pens. A vase of white lilies perfumed the room gently. The door clicked shut. Evelyn entered, greeted everyone with a composed nod, and sat down. "Thank you all for coming. We have documents to read and decisions to make." Daniel crossed his arms, visibly annoyed. Linda clutched a tissue. Emily placed the watch box in the center of the table, like a witness to everything. The silence framed the moment. Evelyn opened the codicil and began reading in a clear, grounded voice. The paper looked even whiter under the lamplight. The tick of the wall clock resumed its command of the room, and as the words filled the air, Emily felt the axis of the story shift. She was no longer asking for permission, no longer waiting to be remembered. She sat with proof, with a password, with her father's memory as compass. The surprise party had faded. The real surprise was this. Richard's carefully laid justice had arrived, exactly on time, and the next decision would change everything. Evelyn Brooks' office suddenly felt too small for the weight of what was about to unfold. The air carried the scent of stored paper and the soft floral fragrance of lilies in the vase. The ticking wall clock dictated the rhythm of the tension. Emily sat to the right, her father's watch box on the table. Daniel, to the left, fiddled with his shirt cuff like he wanted to tear it off. Linda sat in the middle, gripping a handkerchief so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Grace leaned against the wall, her eyes locked on her friend like a quiet sentinel. Evelyn opened the codicil, adjusted her glasses, and began to read. Her voice was steady, unhurried, each word placed in the air with deliberate weight. Richard Carter, as an attachment to his original will, states that any assets stored in safe deposit box 231 at Riverside Community Bank may only be accessed in the presence of and with written consent from both heirs, Daniel Carter and Emily Carter. Emily didn't look away from the document. The lawyer's voice confirmed everything her father had hinted at. Daniel shifted in his seat, trying to hide his discomfort, but each sentence landed on his shoulders like a brick. "This codicil also stipulates," Evelyn continued, "that if either heir attempts to access the box without the other's involvement, their corresponding share shall be automatically transferred into a trust in Emily Carter's name. The purpose? To fund her education, life projects, and personal security." A sharp silence followed. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but Evelyn raised a hand, signaling him to wait until the reading was complete. "Lastly, this document states that the family home shall remain under the lifetime usufruct of Linda Carter, but any decision regarding the workshop and the back lot requires joint approval from Emily Carter." She closed the folder, removed her glasses, and looked directly at Daniel and Linda. "There is proof that the vault was accessed without Emily's presence." Emily pulled the bank access record from her backpack and slid the document across the table. The paper's slide sounded louder than it should. Evelyn reviewed it, nodded. "It's confirmed." Daniel shot up from his chair. "This is ridiculous. Dad never meant to punish me. I'm the oldest. I've always handled everything." Emily replied, calm and seated. "You handled what suited you, Daniel, and forgot I exist." Daniel's face reddened. He pointed a shaking finger at her. "You were always the shadow. Dad only gave you that watch and vague words because he couldn't admit I was the one in charge." Emily took a deep breath. Her heart raced, but her voice came out clear. "If I was the shadow, then why did he write a codicil giving me equal power?" Daniel hesitated. The words stuck in his throat. Linda, distressed, stood. "Enough, both of you. Your father wanted unity, not war." Emily met her mother's eyes. "Then why did you and Daniel open the vault without me?" Linda stepped back, her eyes filling with tears. I thought it would be easier. You've always been sensitive. I wanted to spare you pain." Emily leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. "Were you sparing me pain, or sparing Daniel complications?" The handkerchief dropped from Linda's lap and hit the floor. Silence followed, heavy as if even the air waited for her answer. Linda couldn't meet her daughter's eyes. Evelyn's voice sliced through. "Mr. Richard Carter anticipated precisely this scenario. That's why he documented this codicil. From this moment forward, the management of the fund and related assets requires Emily's active involvement. Regarding the unilateral access attempt, the educational trust is now in effect. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. The sound echoed off the walls. This is a joke. You're trying to strip me of what's rightfully mine. Evelyn remained composed. This isn't about what anyone wants. This is about the law. Emily watched her brother's every movement. The man who had always believed he was the center of the family now squirmed like a child, realizing the game wasn't his alone. Daniel stared at her, eyes burning. You'll never have what I have. You'll never be me. Emily didn't flinch. I don't want to be you. I just want what's mine. The silence after that line was final. Grace stepped forward and placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, a gesture of victory. Evelyn gathered the papers, returned them to the folder, and said, "This meeting is adjourned. The next step is to formalize the trust and register the updated terms of management." As they left the office, the hallway seemed brighter. Emily walked with firm steps, her father's letter folded in her pocket, the watch ticking on her wrist like a second heartbeat. Grace smiled beside her, proud. Linda followed behind, worn down, weighed by years of decisions that now felt 3 times heavier. Daniel walked in silence, his face tight with restrained fury. Outside, the sun peeked through clouds, reflecting off car windows. Emily inhaled deeply, the cold air filling her lungs. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She wasn't a shadow. She was the recognized heir. But Daniel stepped closer before she crossed the street. His voice was low, laced with venom. "This isn't over." Emily didn't hesitate. "No, it's just beginning." And that's when the unexpected happened. The next morning brought a crisp cold, with a clear sky after the rain. The glass of Riverside Community Bank reflected a metallic shade of blue. Inside, the air conditioner carried the scent of a new filter. Marvin waited with a stack of folders, blue ink pens, and a heavy stamp that looked like it could end arguments with a single thud. Emily arrived with Grace by her side. Linda and Daniel showed up a few minutes later, quieter than usual. Marvin spoke. "We'll be formalizing the trust as per legal instructions and registering the co-administration clause for the workshop and the backlot," Evelyn added, "and attaching the record of unilateral access." Pages passed from hand to hand with the crisp sound of paper flipping. The stamp came down 3 times, marking dates and seals. Emily signed with steady handwriting, her hand surprisingly calm. Linda signed with a faint tremble that even her tissue couldn't hide. Daniel signed without looking at anyone, his jaw clenched. Each signature felt like a small course correction. The blue ink glistened for a second before it dried. Marvin pulled a manila envelope from the file cabinet and placed it on the table. This item was recorded as withdrawn from the vault on Wednesday. It's a USB drive registered as an inventory directive, under the precautionary court order attached by Dr. Brooks. Its contents will be duplicated and entered into the record, with copies for all parties. Evelyn inserted the drive into a laptop and projected the contents onto the meeting room screen. Folders with dates, a file named Carter Plan, a spreadsheet tracking the shared fund, instructions for workshop upkeep, roof repair estimates, and a final audio note recorded by Richard. Their father's voice filled the room with a calm that carried the weight of truth. Richard said, "If you're hearing this, it means I trust the path you've chosen, or the one life forced you onto. The house is a harbor. The workshop is a bridge. The fund is a tool, not a trophy. Daniel, leadership is not a shortcut. Emily, your clarity is light. Take care of each other." When the audio ended, Linda raised a hand to her mouth. The scent of lilies from Grace's jacket seemed to fill the air, mixed with the faint salt of tears. Linda turned to her daughter. "I was wrong with you. I thought protecting Daniel meant protecting the family. It didn't. I'm sorry." Emily held her mother's gaze, a shiver running through her as the words finally landed where they belonged. "I can try to forgive you, but I need to see change." Daniel stared at the polished tabletop, the lamp reflecting a ring of light across the surface. He exhaled, glanced at his sister, then at Evelyn. "I went over the line. I thought I could fix everything on my own. I have no excuse." Evelyn jotted something down and closed the folder with a definitive gesture. "From this moment on, all fund transactions and decisions about the workshop require both signatures. The trust is active, holding the portion redirected by the penalty clause. I suggest you choose a project together to honor Richard's memory." Later that afternoon, Emily walked to the back of the house. The workshop was just as it had always been, smelling of oil, sawdust, and cold metal. Sunlight streamed through the slats, lifting golden dust into the air. The workbench still bore cut marks and varnish stains from long ago. Daniel stood in the doorway, no longer the king of the space. He looked smaller inside that rectangle of light. Emily placed the watch box next to a metal square ruler. I was thinking about turning this place into a community workshop for neighbors to learn and repair. Dad's plan already included funding estimates. If you're on board, we can start here. Daniel took a long moment. I'm in. I'd like to help with logistics and safety, and I want you to keep Dad's watch, at least for now. Emily opened the box. The worn leather strap felt soft, survivor of time. The scratched glass caught a sliver of sunlight. She thought of the birthday gift she had planned to give, long before the documents, the codicil, the fallout. She thought of her father's words, the phrase hidden behind the lining, the codicil that had led her here. I still want you to have the watch, not as a peace offering, but as a reminder of who we need to be from now on. If you accept it as a commitment to respect, it's yours. Daniel gave a small nod, deeply grateful, holding back emotion like water cupped in his hands. I accept it as a commitment. The next day, the neighborhood noticed something different. Emily and Grace opened the workshop windows, stirred up dust, swept up wood shavings, labeled the shelves. Linda arrived with a pitcher of lemonade and a simple cornbread cake, a small gesture that felt heavy with apology. Children peered inside, curious about the tools. An elderly man offered some lumber he'd been storing in his yard. The space began to breathe differently. A hand-lettered sign was hung on the gate, Carter Workshop, Bridge and Harbor. That night, the house sounded different. No loud music, no forced party laughter, just quiet voices, footsteps that didn't avoid each other, the soft clink of cutlery on plates. Emily sat on the porch with her mother. The breeze carried the scent of leaves and some hidden flower from the garden. Linda reached her hand across the table. I may not know how to fix everything, but I want to learn. With you. Emily took her mother's hand, felt the warmth of the touch, and looked over at Daniel. Her father's watch now on his wrist, adjusted to the right time. The second hand drew its circle with quiet precision. The inheritance had stopped being an object and become a practice. Grace appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of tea. The workshop officially opens on Saturday. There's already a wait list. Emily smiled, truly in place for the first time. The injustice that once pushed her out had become a tool for pulling others in. The will had become a compass. The vengeance of abandonment had turned into a boundary, not a wound. The watch now marked more than time. It marked a new rhythm between them, and what came next would change everything for good. The workshop now smelled of fresh paint and sanded wood. The sound of tools blended with the laughter of children who popped in, eager to learn. Emily watched neighbors help reorganize shelves, Daniel handing out screws, Linda brewing coffee in thermal carafes. Grace painted a bright banner in bold letters, Carter Workshop, Bridge and Harbor. The evening light streamed through the windows, scattering golden beams across the floor. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel like an unwelcome late guest in her own life. Her father's watch ticked steadily on Daniel's wrist as Emily jotted ideas into a fresh notebook. Every second-hand movement seemed to affirm that Richard was still guiding the family, even in absence. He had measured twice and made one precise cut. He laid out a path that only revealed itself when the time was right, and that time had finally come. Resentment hadn't vanished entirely. The harsh words, the heavy silences, the tears, they all lingered in memory, but now they held meaning, not just scars. The exclusion Emily had felt her whole life had become a tool for clarity, a signal that silence doesn't have to be submission. It can be a choice. As voices filled the workshop, Emily realized that her father's legacy wasn't just about material inheritance. It was about time, about sharing, respecting, and choosing, about leaving no one behind. The legacy wasn't only in the safe deposit box or the trust or the stamped documents. It was there, woven into the smell of wood and coffee, the hands now working side by side, the bridge being built between past and future. Some would say Emily found justice. Others might call it vengeance. Hard to say. Maybe it was simply the courage to inhabit the space that had always belonged to her.